Om Prithvi Shantirantariksha Shantir Dyaus Shantir Disha Shantiravantara Disha Shantiragnish Shantir Vayu Shantiraditya Shantish Chandrama Shantir Nakshatrani Shantirapa Shantiroshadaya Shantir Vanaspataya Shantir Gau Shantiraja Shantirashva Shantir Purusha Shantir Brahma Shantir Brahmana Shantir Shantireva Shanti Shantir Me Astu Shantihi. May there be peace on earth and in the sky. May there be peace in the water and in all directions. May there be peace in the plants, in the trees, and in animals. May there be peace in the hearts of all beings. May there be peace in everyone and in everything. Sarvetra sukhinas santu, sarve santu niramayaha, sarve bhadrani pashyantu, ma kaschit dukkha bhag bhavet, sarvastaratu durgani, sarvo bhadrani pashyatu, sarvas sadbuddhimapnotu, sarvas sarvatra nandatu. May all be happy and healthy. May all see what is good, and may no one experience misery. May all overcome their obstacles and acquire good tendencies. May people everywhere find joy and fulfillment. Let us now spend some time touching the center of peace and joy in our hearts. A good way to begin the practice is to withdraw the scattered energies of the mind and bring them to rest on one point. That point can be our own breathing. Let us therefore practice breathing with awareness. As we breathe in, let us visualize that our body and mind are being filled with love, strength, and compassion. And as we breathe out, let us release all the stress, anxiety, and exhaustion in the body and mind. Let us practice this way for a while. Let us now turn our attention to the region of our heart. Although God is present everywhere and in everyone, the divine presence can be felt most clearly in our own hearts. We can meditate in any way we have been taught. To remain focused, we can take the help of a short mental prayer or a mantra or a divine name. Let us now spend some time dwelling on the presence of God in our hearts. Om Asatoma Satkamaya Tamasoma Jyotirgamaya Mrityorma Amritam Gamaya Aviravir Maheti Rudrayatte Takshinam Mukham Te Namam Pahi Nityam. May the Divine lead us from the unreal to the real, from darkness to light, from death to immortality. May the Divine Consciousness fill our hearts and protect us. We begin today on verse number 294. Aham padarthastvaham sakshi nityam sushupta vapi bhava darshanat brute yajo nitya iti shruti swayam tat pratyagatma sarasatvilakshanaha. But the real I, who is the witness of the ego and the rest, is always seen to be present even in deep sleep. The Vedas themselves say the Atman is birthless and eternal. Therefore, the inner self is different from the gross and the subtle. So we continue with the section on non-duality in practice. One of the important things about non-dual philosophy is that it's not simply an intellectual exercise. It's not something that is fascinating in itself because it is very logical and reasonable, but because its real benefit, its real meaning, its real value is recognized only when we actually start living accordingly. So it's not enough to know that the Atman is eternal, birthless and deathless. But practice means to know I am eternal, I am birthless and deathless. And yes, this is not how we have been thinking about ourselves, and therefore it is difficult. We know that it is so difficult to change our habits, even physical habits. If you are accustomed to waking up at a certain time, and then we suddenly say, from tomorrow onwards, I'm going to wake up an hour earlier, it's tough. With the willpower, we might be able to do it for a few days, but the force of old habits, the kind of a muscle memory that both the body and the mind have developed, will drag us back to that habit that we have acquired. So, developing new habits becomes difficult because we are not able to let go of the old habits. And that is so much more true with regard to thinking. It's even more difficult. If our mind has begun to think in a certain sort of way, while we can appreciate a newer way of thinking, a better way of thinking, to actually start thinking that way becomes difficult because our mind gets pulled back to the old, tried and tested method of thinking. And that's the challenge before us all. Because most of us go from our day-to-day activities looking upon ourselves as human beings, looking upon ourselves as beings who were born at one point, will eventually grow older and die at one point. That's our default way of thinking. And now what the book wants us to do, the Advaita in practice, means to just change our way of thinking. And it's not just a little bit of a change, it's a very radical change. So from thinking that we are human beings, we have to now see ourselves, I'm a divine being. not simply thinking that this is me in the sense of this body and the mind, but that the real me is more than this body and the mind. The body is perishable, the mind is changeable, but the real me will never perish. The real me will never change. And that is what is meant here. The real I, who is the witness of the ego and the rest. Now, one thing we have to understand by the term witness. If I'm witnessing something, I'm different from that thing. If I were identical with it, I wouldn't be able to see it. In other words, for any activity to be possible, the subject and the object have to be two distinct entities. If I'm reading a book, I'm the subject. The book is the object of my perception. What connects me with the book is the activity of reading. So subject, object, and the action. Now I'm able to read a book because I'm not the book. So whatever can be made an object of my perception, it's not me. If I can see my body, feel my body, then it's an object of my perception. Therefore, I'm not the body, because the subject is always a subject. The object is always an object. Same thing with regard to the mind. If I were the mind, then I wouldn't be able to feel that changes in the mind to be my changes. So I'm able to see and feel the happiness, but where I get deluded, while I'm experiencing the happiness, I just say this is my experience. Well, it is really the mind's experience. It's really the body's experience. Now, this can get complicated, of course, because the body and mind are material. How can they experience anything at all? Experience is possible only for a conscious entity. And the only conscious entity here is the spirit, the Atman. So, who is really experiencing anything? The Atman, in its true nature, is one and infinite. There is nothing apart from the Atman. And therefore, there is nothing for the Atman to experience. In order to experience, you need an object. The Atman is eternal and infinite. There is no object. So the Atman cannot really, and the word really is important here, the Atman really cannot experience anything. The body and the mind cannot experience anything either, because the body and mind are just material, just atoms and molecules. So far as we know, the table is not experiencing anything, at least from our perspective. Even if you ask, hey, are you experiencing anything? It doesn't answer. But again, it's from our perspective. Maybe this is very conscious. Maybe it feels, but there's no way to know. But at least as far as the categories we create in our mind about living, non-living, conscious and unconscious, we say the table, being a material object, is not conscious, doesn't experience anything the way I experience things. If that makes sense, then the body is as much a material object as this table is. If you burn this table down, it will be reduced to ashes. If you burn a body down after its death, it will be a heap of ashes also. And then when you have those two heaps of ashes, you will not be able to distinguish which is the ash from the table and which is the ash from the body. And so, the body and mind being material objects, they cannot experience anything. The Atman cannot experience anything. And yet, we are experiencing the world. And that's really the puzzle, if you like. And the way Vedanta teachers describe that is that, to just repeat what I said before, the Atman cannot experience anything, the body and the mind cannot experience anything. When experience seems to become possible is when this Atman forgets I am the Atman. And somehow gets mixed up with the body and mind. It's just like if the rope were to forget I am the rope and begin to say, I am a snake. That's essentially what has happened. It's like we forget when we go to sleep that I am lying in my bed. We forget that. And then in my dream, maybe I'm running the marathon. So what is real? The me who is lying and snoring in my bed, or the me who is running the marathon? So the me who is lying in the bed has forgotten myself. And that's why I don't even know I'm lying in my bed. Because that me now has suddenly begun to see I'm running the marathon in my dream. So the real I, who is the witness of the ego and the rest. So the ego, our present sense of I, we would not even be aware of our sense of I if it were not for the consciousness. So the reason, with a little bit of effort, we are able to experience that I as an object of my perception, not as a material object, but we know this I. I'm able to feel that I. That's why I keep on saying I. So the one who witnesses this I is different from the I. So my present I that we all have in our hearts is not the Atman, it's the ego. Now, again, I'm just trying to show you the layers of subtleties involved here. Is then ego something different, which has no basis, and the Atman is here, and somehow this ego has become me? They are not really different, just as the rope and the snake are not two different entities. So it's when the rope forgets itself, it begins to see itself as the snake. Similarly, when the Atman forgets itself, the real I is forgotten, and on its place, this fake I gets superimposed. But it doesn't cover it fully. If the fake I would cover the real I fully, then this fake I could never be experienced. So a little bit of the real I is present. Just as a little bit of the rope is present. Even when I'm seeing the snake, a little bit of the rope is present. But what do I mean by little bit? First of all, if the rope is curled up, the snake is curled up. The rope is curled up, the snake can't be straight. That's obviously. But more than that, what makes me feel that there is a snake here? That isness. What makes me feel that I'm seeing a snake because the snake exists in front of me? That existence of the snake is really the existence of the rope, because there is really no snake. So what is existing is really the rope. So when I say that the snake is there, that is there part of that statement is true. Something is there. But where I'm mistaken is, instead of saying the rope is there, I'm saying the snake is there. So a little bit of the rope shows itself through that is there, that existence. Similarly, a little bit, just like the snake doesn't fully cover the rope, the darkness, that's why we always say it's a semi-lit room or a room with insufficient light. We never say a completely dark room. Because if the room were complete dark, it would completely cover the snake. Completely cover the rope. And if it completely covers the rope, you cannot see the snake. It has to cover the rope partially. Only then that superimposition occurs. Similarly, the Atman is covered only partially, not fully. And thank God. Otherwise, we wouldn't even know that we exist. So I might say, I am a human being. A part of that statement is true. I am. I am someone, and which is true. I exist. Where I am mistaken, where the delusion comes in, is to say, I am a human being. So half of the sentence is correct. I am. I exist. But instead of saying I am a divine being, or I am infinite and unchanging, I say I am a human being. I am limited. I am mortal. That's the delusion. So the real I, who is the witness of the ego and the rest, and hence the different from them, is always seen to be present even in deep sleep. And we have seen this before. If the I were totally absent, the real I were totally absent in deep sleep, next morning we wouldn't know anything. But we know that we didn't know anything. So there was this real I present there who experienced nothingness in deep sleep. There was this I present there who experienced that bliss. That's why we, after a good night's sleep, we wake up and say, oh, I slept so well, I feel so rested and feel so happy. So that happiness that we experience in the morning after a good sleep is a memory of what I experienced in that deep sleep. There was someone experiencing that. When I wake up in the morning and say, I slept so deeply, I didn't know anything at all. Maybe it rained last night. Maybe there was a mild earthquake, but I didn't know anything at all. So that my knowledge of not knowing anything occurs because that consciousness, that real I is present. And therefore, the Atman is birthless and eternal. This statement is from the Katha Upanishad. Is different from the gross and the subtle, means it is different from both the body and the mind. Body, the gross body, mind, the subtle body. And that is the source of both of these is ignorance. 295. Vikarinam sarva vikara vetta nityo vikaro bhavitum samarhati manoratha swapna sushuptishu sphutam punah punardrishtam asattvametayoho. One who perceives all the changes in things that change has to be eternal and unchanging. The unreality of these two, the gross and the subtle, is repeatedly observed while daydreaming and in dream and deep sleep. So change and changeless. In order to see motion, in order to even perceive motion, I could be in a state of motion, but at a different speed. Or I have to be motionless. If there are two entities, let's say two trains and two parallel tracks, are moving at the same time, with same speed, and I wouldn't see any motion at all. When I look out of the window of a train, I see motion. I see trees and everything kind of going in the opposite direction. And if I was totally clueless, I would think I'm at rest and the other things are moving. But if I was standing on the road or on the farm and then I see a train moving, I'm able to see it because I'm at rest and the train is moving. And therefore, if both are changing, then there would be no continuity. If both are changing identically, no change would be observed. And we find that all the changes that we see around us, there is both. That we observe the change and there is also continuity. And the one continuity that is found is just consciousness. Because from the waking world, when I start dreaming, I enter a completely different world. It might have a few elements of this waking world kind of mixed up in a different combination, but it's still not a completely identical world like this. It's different in many ways. The I in the dream is different from the I who is awake. Because the I who is in the waking world is asleep, lying in the bed. The I in my dream is, to continue with the whole dream, is still running the marathon. And so both the content of the dream and the I in that dream changes. But what remains steady, unchanging, is consciousness. That is why I'm able to see the dream. That is why I'm able to remember the dream. I'm conscious of the dream that is being seen. In deep sleep, I'm conscious that nothing is being seen. One who perceives all the changes in things that change has to be eternal and unchanging. What are the changes we saw? One thing is clear, that when we, in daydreaming, that was what was said in the, what is this verse or earlier verse? Oh, here, this verse itself. He repeatedly observed while daydreaming in dream and deep sleep. The changes that we see is this. In daydreams and in dreams, the body disappears. By disappears, I mean disappears from our consciousness. I cannot be simultaneously be aware of my body and the world around me and be dreaming at the same time. It doesn't happen that way. And so this body and this world has to go out of the field of my consciousness in order for me to be conscious of the dream. I cannot see both at the same time. Now, in deep sleep, I am not conscious of my body and the mind. Both kind of disappear. And this is the change that is being referred to. So the change and the changeless. The body and the mind keep on changing because they appear and disappear periodically. But consciousness itself is the continuity that never changes, that never stops. And that unchanging, eternal witness is the Atman, is consciousness, and that alone is real. Eternal and unchanging are actually interconnected, because only if something is infinite, it is unchanging. I mean, what is change? And one way of understanding change is there is an entity or an object, and unless there is something outside, some force or something outside that acts on it to bring about a change. But if there is just one, then it is by necessity has to be unchanging, because with respect to what will it change, and there is nothing else to effect that change in that entity. Verse 296. Ato abhimanam tyajamam sapinde pindabhimananyapi buddhi kalpite kalatraya abadhyam akhanda bodham jnatva swamatmanam upaihi shantim. Therefore, stop identifying with this imaginary lump of flesh and the I attached to it. Attain peace, knowing your own self to be the eternal awareness, unaffected by the past, present, and future. So stop identifying, because the body and the I are transient and constantly changing. We know that if I am holding on to something that is constantly moving and changing, I cannot be safe. That's why if there is a tornado or a storm, people go into the basement or to the shelters, because compared to this massive winds that come, everything is shaking, everything is moving, everything is being blown away. At that time, I need to be in some place which itself will not be blown away by the wind, which is steady. But if I'm standing out and just holding on to some pillar outside, and the pillar is transient and changing and moving, I'll get carried away and I'll destroy myself. And so therefore, in the midst of all the changes that are occurring inside and outside, physical and psychological, gross and subtle, the only way we can be steadfast and steady and protect ourselves is if we can hold on to something that is unmoving, that is steady. And the only entity that is steady and unmoving and unchanging is the true self, is the Atman. In the language of devotion, which means the same thing, the only entity, the only being who is unchanging and moving is God. That's why a devotee holds on to God, because all the storms will come and go. Even the storms are transient. They can do tremendous havoc, but that is not eternal. Storms come and go and they leave a trail of destruction. But if I hold on, if I have this shelter, a firm shelter which cannot be destroyed, and that shelter is God. That shelter is the Atman. You can look at it subjectively as my true self. You can look at it in a more personified way as God. Both are equally good, both are equally effective. So only then attain peace, because no lasting peace can come unless we know our true nature. And we see that. It's not that we don't have peace in life. There are times, there are moments of peace. If we are lucky, maybe a few days are filled with peace. If you are even more lucky, maybe a few months also. But something happens and our peace is shattered. Our peace is very fragile. Yes, we experience joy in life, but our joy is very fragile. It doesn't last. That's the challenge. It's not that we don't have peace and joy in life. We have plenty, but it comes and goes. So what we are looking for is not simply peace and joy, but we want a peace that is steady, a peace that will never ever go away. We want joy and contentment that will be steady, that will never ever go away. And that can happen only by knowing our true nature. That's why it says, unaffected by the past, present, and future. In other words, being beyond the realm of time, beyond the domain of time. How does time affect us? Through memories of the past. Actually, think about it. How much are we really living? The joy of breathing, the joy of knowing that we are alive, even just to be present and say, I'm alive, is actually a wonderful experience. But that's so rare, because living in the present is so rare. If we observe carefully, we will see, right from the time we wake up in the morning till we go to sleep, our mind is either thinking about the past, what happened yesterday or last week or last year, or is thinking about future. Oh, these are the things I need to finish before this weekend, or what I need to do before next year or 10 years. How often or how much time do I keep on about what has already happened in the past, the memories of things that have happened, or anxieties about the things that are yet to come? Between these two pulls of the past and the future, we have very little time to truly exist. Just be present and take a deep breath, and you just feel, I'm alive, I'm able to breathe. Every moment can be a blissful experience if we are not simultaneously being dragged by our past or being dragged by our future. And that's what is meant here by saying unaffected by the past, present, and future. Swami Vivekananda said, it's a very fascinating statement. He said, time is but the method of our thinking. We are the eternal present tense. There is no such thing as past and future. I mean, what is past? This particular moment, which is the present moment, the very next moment it has become a past moment. Or think about it in a little larger way. Today, by tomorrow, today would have become yesterday. And that which is tomorrow will be today, tomorrow. So there is no fixed thing called yesterday or tomorrow or today. They are just, time seems to be passing, and which is also a delusion. There is a 13th or 14th century text written by one Bhartrhari, and he makes this, it's a poetical work, and he makes this statement. He says, Kalo na yata vayameva yata. Kala is time. Yata means movement. Kalo na yata. Time is not passing. We are passing. And that's the delusion. Because we say, oh, time passes so fast. Time doesn't pass. Time is, simply is. We are the ones who are passing. From our childhood to youth to middle age and old age and death. We are the one who are going away. Time will be here. But we think time is passing. And so that's another, a relative motion. Who is moving and who is not moving? So time, the bondage of time, once we recognize how much our lives are controlled by time and how it robs us of our freedom, we would want to be free from it. But as long as consciousness is tied up to this body and mind, I am kind of handcuffed to this time, space, and causality. So if I want these cuffs to go and become truly free, I need to find a way to go beyond space, time, and causality. As long as I'm bound by space, the Sanskrit word for that is desha, kala, desha, nimitta. As long as I'm within the realm of space, I'm occupying some area there. And that's why my form becomes real because space is real to me. My birth and death become real. The changes in my life become real because time is real to me. But what is time really? If you want to define time, one way of doing that is time is a distance between two events. That's all. The physical distance, of course, is in space. Time is just one event and the other event. How much time is it separated by? So, the experience of duality is tied up with both space, time, and causality. Causality means cause and effect. We always ask, why did this happen? The reason we are able to ask any why question is based on the assumption that everything must have a cause. And so, try as we might, the mind, because when the Upanishads say that ultimate truth, the mind cannot take us there, the senses cannot take us there, and that is, it simply means this. Our senses can perceive and experience things which are within time, within space, and within causality. Our mind can think only of those things which are within space, within time, and within causality. And the reality, the truth, is beyond time, beyond space, and beyond causality. And therefore the mind cannot reach that. The mind cannot go there. And so being unaffected by the past, present, and future means going beyond the hold of time over us. 297. Tyajabhimanam kulagotra nama rupashrameshvardra lingasya dharmanapi kartrutadin tyaktva bhava khanda sukhaswarupaha. Stop identifying with family, lineage, name, form, and the stage of life, all of which relate to the gross body. Be the eternal bliss yourself after giving up also the characteristics of the subtle body. So stop identifying with all of these, family, lineage, name, form, etc., because all these things are transient. They are transient because many of these things, in fact, all of these things pertain only to this life. If I believe that my existence is not sandwiched between birth and death, that I existed before I was born, that I will continue to exist after this body dies. And therefore, all of these entities, family, lineage, name, form, stage of life, it's like if you are acting in a long TV serial, and all these things, it just belong to one episode of that. And maybe in next episode, things are going to radically change. Maybe the whole story is going to change. Maybe different characters will come up. And therefore, the more I identify with these things, the more I am held down. Which sometimes can be a very terrifying thought. Because of these strong emotional bonds that get formed in life. In the Ramayana, there is the story of, many of you are familiar already with the stories. So I'm not going to go into details, but when the stepmother, Kaikeyi, asked Rama through the father and the story of the promises and so on, that he has to go to the forest and his brother and stay there for 14 years, and then Bharata, his younger brother, will be made the king. So Rama goes to the forest, and then Bharat, the younger brother, he arrives. He was not there when all this drama was taking place. So when he comes, and he's furious. He loves his brother Ram, and he wants Ram to be the king. But that's the decision taken by the parents. And so when Bharat revolts and says, no, I don't accept that. I'm going to go to the forest and bring my brother back. And then that time, Bharat is told, you can't do that. You have to follow your scriptures. And what do the scriptures say? We read in the Upanishads, Matru Devo Bhava, Pitru Devo Bhava. Look upon your father as the divine, as the manifestation of the divine. Look upon your mother as a manifestation of the divine. And obedience to the elders in the family is a virtue. So all of these parts of tradition and scriptural injunctions were cited to him and said, you cannot do it. Now, Bharat, he had studied the scriptures himself and was very intelligent also. So he said, I'm not denying the scriptures. He said, I totally accept that I have to honor my parents. I have to be obedient to my parents. But then he asked the question. But he said, But who is my parent? Because then he says, this Dashratha, the king, this Kaikeyi, the mother, in every birth I have had a set of parents. They are parents for this life. Yes, they have given me this body. But it's not like they were my parents in every time I was born, in all of my past births. Or they will be my parents in my future births as well. Now I said, this is not a very comforting thought, because we have these attachments, we have these close connections with ours. But if you are able to kind of, at least temporarily, keep your emotional things a little bit at a distance and look at it objectively as far as you can, it makes sense that every time there is birth, not just in human beings, in animals, in birds, any living creature will have parents. And if we believe in the idea of rebirth, every birth will have a different set of parents. And therefore, when the scripture says, Tvameva Mata Cha Pita Tvameva, addressing God, that you are my father, you are my mother, you are my brother, you are my everything. What it is pointing out is that the unchanging eternal father, the unchanging eternal mother can only be the divine. Now, what does it mean? What happens to then our biological parents? They have to be honored as well, insofar as they reflect the divinity, the glory, the virtues, the values, the principles that we associate with spiritual life. Sri Ramakrishna says in his conversations, you can read it in the Gospel, that he himself was such a dutiful son. He took good care of his mother. His father passed away when he was very young. And yet, he also referred to Mother Kali as his mother, the eternal mother. What he said was this, that we have to be obedient to the elders in our family. And then there's a qualified statement. And he said, but if they stand in the way of your spiritual life, if they stand on the way to your God, then you're not obliged to obey them. But insofar as they support you in your goal of life, in your ideals in life, they are reflecting the glory of the divine. And that is what is meant by saying Matra Devo Bhava, Pitru Devo Bhava. Indeed, God does appear in the form of these maternal and paternal figures in our lives who nourish us, who love us, who bring us up. But that glory of the divine, insofar as it manifested through them, we have to give them all respect and love. Now, in this particular case, in the Ramayana instance, clearly there's something not quite right. And so Bharat says, my real father is Ram, my real mother is Sita, and I will obey them. I will go and try to see what they want me to do. And so when Bharat goes to the forest and tells Ram, no, you need to come and become a king, and then Ram persuades him and says, no, you go, take care of the kingdom on my behalf if you want. And then Bharat doesn't argue with him, because he says that's the order of whom he sees as his real father. And so as devotees, we should honor and respect and take good care of our parents, just as they have continued to take good care of us all through our life. But also recognize that behind them stands our eternal Father, eternal Mother. And our primary duty is to reach our eternal Father, the Divine Father and Divine Mother. And to the extent we are able to see the presence and the glory of them in our parents in every life, we are very fortunate to do so. That's the idea. So all of these things are related to the gross body. Be the eternal bliss yourself, after giving up also the characteristics of the subtle body. The characteristics of the subtle body would be clearly the ego, which attaches with the body and mind, and the consequent suffering associated with memories, hopes, fears, and so on. And then he says, be the eternal bliss yourself. The word be is important because don't just enjoy the bliss, but be the bliss yourself. There is a song of Ram Prasad, a great saint in Bengal, which Ramakrishna used to sing, and it ends with this, saying, Mother, I don't want to be sugar, I want to eat sugar. And I mean, we don't know, in the sense that, yes, of course, if you eat sugar, you're going to experience, and if you love sweets, then it's going to be wonderful. But what happens to the sugar itself? Is the sugar able to experience that bliss? And as I said, there is no way for us to know. As far as we see from our perspective, sugar is the material object. But what is the difference between enjoying bliss and being bliss? And one difference is simply this. As long as I'm enjoying something through the body and mind, then that is coming through some object. And if that object is taken away from me, if the source of that joy is an object, then if that source is taken away from me, then I'm not going to feel that joy anymore. But on the other hand, if I am joy myself, if I am that bliss myself, nobody can take me away from me. Even when murders take place, the body can be taken away because the body is not me. Deep sleep kind of takes away my mind for a short while. The mind is not me. But at no point can I be taken away from myself. I will always be there. And so if that I is bliss, then it's eternal, because there's nobody who can take that bliss. And that's why the distinction between enjoying bliss and being the eternal bliss yourself. So the more we stop identifying with the body and mind, we can be that bliss. We can both enjoy the bliss, because whatever we see, if we see anything outside at all, that will be just the glory of the divine. And we see, Ramakrishna was filled with bliss. You see his face in Samadhi, just filled with bliss. So we can enjoy bliss and be bliss at the same time. So we'll stop here today. If you have any thoughts, ideas, comments, questions.
Hariam Swamiji. Swamiji, given that the mind is stuck in time, space, and causality and cannot fathom true existence, does the mind have any role in Jnana Yoga?
Yeah, sure. Good. Thank you. Yes, it does. And I have mentioned on earlier occasions that the mind is the only real instrument we have to realize God. And so there are these two statements in the Upanishads which are superficially do look mutually contradictory. One is which I've already stated, that the mind cannot go beyond time, space, and causality. The mind cannot go there. Avang manasa gocharam, that ultimate reality is beyond manas, beyond mind. That is one statement. There is another statement in a different Upanishad which says, Manasaivedam aptavyam. Manasa eva idam aptavyam. Aptavyam means attained. Manasa eva, that truth, that ultimate reality can be attained only with the help of the mind, only by the mind. Seems totally contradictory. So we go turn to the commentators. And Shankaracharya explains. He says, Susamskritena manasa, a mind which is completely transparent, a mind which is completely purified. So a mind which is filled with hopes and fears, a mind that is filled with desires for perishable things, hasn't become transparent yet. And that mind cannot go beyond time, space, and causality. But if I can first minimize all these limiting features of the mind will go on becoming more and more transparent. And you might remember reading in the Gospel of Ramakrishna, Sri Ramakrishna says, pure mind, pure buddhi, and pure Atman are one and the same thing. In other words, if the mind becomes so crystal clear, so transparent, that it completely reflects the divine as it is, without any distortion. And at that point, it reaches such level of transparency, it just melts. Or if you want to use a more violent language, say the mind is destroyed. If you want to be a little gentle, you say the mind just melts or disappears, and the truth alone remains. So that's how it occurs. And that's why the primary function of all of these four yogas, Jnana Yoga, Karma Yoga, Bhakti Yoga, and Raja Yoga, the first thing that all of these yogas do is purify the mind. Until the mind is purified, there is no real spiritual progress. And hence also we see, blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God. In different ways, in different traditions, we find the same message coming. Although it gets kind of expressed in different words and in different symbols and different metaphors. Yeah.
Swamiji, to purify our mind, I need my mind to purify. The tool is the mind. How I will purify my mind without the mind? And
correct. Good question. The mind itself. Yeah, please sit down. The mind is not one monolithic whole. The mind, as we know, has several divisions has occurred. There is the conscious mind, there is the unconscious mind. There is a part of the mind that seems somehow to be more transparent than the other part of the mind. It's sometimes like, even if you go to a big lake or something, certain areas the water will be very muddy, and in some areas like, oh, the water is good here. Sometimes in India I have seen, even in the river, sometimes people go to take a dip, and there are some areas, I've seen in the Ganges, there are some areas people go to wash their clothes and wash their dishes. And the water in that area is not that good. All the water is flowing. Overall, in that one section, it's never really clear. But there is other places you might find is like, oh, the water is clear here. So people go and use that place for like taking a dip, some other place and so on. The mind is a little bit like that. So it's not uniform, which is why the dilemmas that we experience in life are because of that. Because if I have to do something and a part of my mind says, do it, it's great. The other part says, no, that may not be right, that may not be ethical. So, and then sometimes people call it the voice of conscience or the voice of God. So there is this inner conflicts that we sometimes occur because there is a part of our mind which is as if a little bit closer to God, which is a little bit more conscious of the values and principles. And there is the other part of our mind which is willing to make compromises, which is willing to be flexible. And so, oftentimes when we have the dilemmas, well, is it the right thing to do or a wrong thing to do? Should I do it or should I not do it? So, it is this higher mind, the mind which is purer, that has to now help this other mind to clean itself. So the cleaning up is actually occurring inside the mind by one part of the mind with the other part. And that is what the Upanishads, and you have a similar verse in the Gita as well, Uddharet Atmana Atmanam, lift the self by the self. So how can you lift the self by the self? And so here, what it means is lift that part of the mind which is troubled, which is filled with desires, which is still attached to the perishable things of the world. Try to lift it by that other part of the mind which likes spiritual life, which feels that longing for God. So all of these inner conflicts we have is because both these things are simultaneously present. So it's a very good question. Yes, the mind is a tool, but the tool that has already gotten subdivided. And so one part of the mind lifting. Does that answer your question? Yeah. Yes.
So Swamiji, carrying on with that one, in the last verse you just said be the bliss. And if you are still experiencing the bliss, that means you are still in a form. You're not yet attained the real.
Yes, yes and no. Partly because, please sit down, the experience, there are two kinds of experiences. One is a sensual experience. The other is a supersensuous experience. A sensuous experience is experience that is mediated through the mind and the senses. And a supersensuous experience is not mediated through this thing. So, in other words, experience coming from an object and a purely subject experience subject. So, if that source of my bliss is coming from some object outside, then of course it's not eternal. But just the bliss I experience by just being myself, that's not coming from an object. And that bliss is not coming through the senses, not coming through the mind. It's just there. It might get expressed through the body and the mind, but it's not the soul. It's like think about it. Sometimes someone who is in samadhi, complete samadhi, sometimes you'll find kind of tears of joy coming through them. You might see the expression of joy on their face. So it is being expressed through the body and the mind. But that joy that is being experienced is the experience of the self, because they aren't even conscious of the external world. So the joy can get expressed through the body and mind, but is not being experienced through the body and mind. It is expressed through it, but not experienced through it. Does that make sense?
It does. Yes.
Okay. Yeah.
It's very difficult, but it does.
Yeah, just think about it. Yeah, it's a thing. Yeah.
More thinking.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Anything else? Okay. So we will stop here today, and then we'll begin next time with the verse 298. Om Jananim Saratam Devim Ramakrishnam Jagatgurum Padapadme Tayo Shritva Pranamami Muhur Muhu. So we spoke a little bit about the Ramayana today, but the Ramanavami, Rama's birthday is coming up this week. And so we'll celebrate it on Sunday. So Sunday we'll have our annual Rama festival at 11 o'clock, and which will conclude with a brief annual meeting as we do every year. So that's the program on Sunday. Next Wednesday we will continue with this study, and on Saturday we'll have meditation as usual. May the Divine Being, who is the Father in heaven of the Christians, Holy One of the Jewish faith, Allah of the Muslims, Buddha of the Buddhists, Tao of the Taoists, Ahura Mazda of the Zoroastrians, the Great Spirit of the Native Americans, and Brahman of the Hindus, lead us from the unreal to the real, from darkness to light, from death to immortality. May we be granted strength, freedom, and clear understanding. May we learn to see God in our own hearts and in everyone around us. May God bless us all and fill our hearts with gratitude, grace, and love. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Peace, peace, peace be unto you.